15 million people. That's how many witnessed my ex-boyfriend's face drain of color on national television when the host asked about the $70,000 I had invested in his revolutionary startup. I sat in the front row, making eye contact with him for the first time in 6 months as the truth unraveled before America. The memory of his stammering voice, the sweat beading on his forehead, and security dragging him off stage will forever be etched in my mind as the sweetest form of justice. But let me take you back to how it all began. Before the cameras, before the betrayal, when I was just another woman who believed in love and innovation. I met Ryan Cooper at a tech networking event in San Francisco. I was 28, working as a software engineer at a mid-sized company, and had spent 5 years building my savings after paying off my student loans. Ryan stood out immediately tall with piercing blue eyes and a charismatic smile that seemed to light up the entire room. When he approached me, discussing the limitations of current project management software, I was instantly drawn to his intelligence and passion. "I've been working on something that will revolutionize how teams collaborate," he said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Nobody else is addressing the integration issues between departments the way my system does." What started as professional admiration quickly blossomed into romance. Our first date lasted 6 hours. Coffee turned into lunch, then a walk along the bay, and finally dinner. We connected on every level. Both from small Midwestern towns, both the first in our families to attend college, both passionate about technology as a tool for efficiency. By our 3rd month together, Ryan had become my confidant, my partner, and my biggest cheerleader. He would leave little notes of encouragement on my bathroom mirror before important meetings. He remembered details about my childhood that even my closest friends forgot. He made me feel seen in a way no one ever had before. "You're brilliant, Megan. Megan," he would say, massaging my shoulders after a long day of coding. "You deserve so much more than what that company gives you." It wasn't until our 5th month together that Ryan began sharing more details about his startup. Enterlink. He explained it as an enterprise solution that would streamline communication between departments, combining elements of project management, messaging, and data analytics. "The problem with current solutions is fragmentation," he explained one night over homemade pasta in his apartment. "Companies use different systems for different functions, creating silos. Enterlink bridges those gaps." He showed me wireframes, user interface mockbus, and preliminary code. It all looked promising, though I noticed some architectural issues that seemed concerning. When I pointed them out, he kissed my forehead. "That's why I need someone like you in my life. Your technical insight is invaluable." As weeks passed, Ryan spoke more frequently about funding challenges. He had invested his life savings $40,000 and had secured another $80,000 from friends and family. But to complete the prototype and attract major investors, he needed more. "A developer in India is demanding more payment to continue," he explained one evening, rubbing his temples. "And without a working prototype, the venture capital firms won't even look at us." I offered to review the code myself, possibly help with development, but Ryan insisted his offshore team had already built a specialized framework. "It would take months to bring someone new up to speed," he said. "We don't have that kind of time. The market window is closing." I didn't press the issue. After all, I trusted him completely by then. We had discussed marriage, children, a future together. His dreams had become my dreams. The request came on our 6-month anniversary. We were at an upscale restaurant overlooking the city, and Ryan had arranged for champagne to be waiting at our table. "To us," he toasted, his eyes locked on mine. "To building a future together." After dessert, he reached across the table and took my hands in his. "Megan, I've been thinking a lot about our future, about building something together that could change both our lives." My heart raced. "Is this a proposal?" "Enterlink is at a critical juncture," he continued. "We're weeks away from a prototype that could revolutionize enterprise communication. With just 70,000 more, we could finish development and start pitching to major clients." The champagne in my stomach turned sour. "Are you asking me for money?" "Oh, it is money," he said quickly. "Investment. Partnership. I'm offering you 10% equity in a company that could be worth millions within 2 years." He squeezed my hands. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe in this completely. This is our chance to build something together." I pulled my hands away, feeling suddenly cold. "Ryan, that's almost all of my savings." "I know it's a lot to ask," he said, his voice softening. "But sometimes in life, we have to take big risks for big rewards. I've already put in everything I have. My parents remortgaged their house to support this. That's how much we all believe in Enterlink." The conversation lasted hours. Ryan showed me projections, competitor analyses, and testimonials from 2 beta testers. He outlined a clear timeline, 3 months to complete the prototype, 3 months for initial client acquisition, and funding rounds to follow. By this time next year, you could quit your job, he promised. We could be working together, building our company, our future. I expressed concerns about the risk, about needing some security. In response, Ryan drafted a simple investment agreement on his laptop, promising 10% equity and priority repayment if the company was sold or liquidated. I'll have my lawyer formalize this tomorrow, he assured me. I want you to feel protected. Against my better judgment, against the warning bells ringing faintly in my mind, I agreed. The next day, I transferred $70,000 to the business account he provided. For 2 weeks, everything seemed normal. Ryan sent daily updates about development progress. He introduced me via video call to Raj, supposedly his lead developer in Bangalore. We continued our life together, though Ryan began traveling more frequently for investor meetings. Then came the first red flag. I asked to see the updated code repository, wanting to understand the product better. The team uses a proprietary version control system, Ryan explained. It's complicated to grant access. Besides, most of it would look like gibberish without context. As a software engineer myself, this explanation made no sense, but I swallowed my doubts. After all, I had already invested my money and my heart. 3 weeks after my investment, Ryan left for what he described as a make-or-break investor retreat in Seattle. He kissed me goodbye, promised to call daily, and left with his suitcase and laptop. The first day, he called twice. The second day, once sounding rushed. The third day, just texts about being swamped with meetings. By the 5th day, his phone went straight to voicemail. After a week of increasingly frantic messages, I went to his apartment. His landlord informed me that Ryan had given notice a month earlier and moved out 3 days ago. His furniture remained, our memories remained, but his purse and items were gone. I felt like I was drowning. The man I loved had disappeared with my savings, my trust, and pieces of my heart. I called the police, but they classified it as a civil matter since I had willingly invested. I contacted his parents only to discover the number he had given me for them was disconnected. I searched social media, finding his profile suddenly private or deleted. It was as if Ryan Cooper had evaporated from my life, leaving only an empty bank account and a shattered sense of trust in his wake. The weeks following Ryan's disappearance were the darkest of my life. I cycled through emotions, devastation at the betrayal, humiliation at my naivety, and rage at his calculated deception. I lost weight, struggled to sleep, and found it impossible to focus at work. The $70,000 represented years of careful saving, money earmarked for a potential down payment on a home, emergency funds, my future security. My best friend Jordan practically moved in, forcing me to eat and accompanying me to file police reports that went nowhere. It's a civil matter, it's a civil matter, they kept saying, even when I showed them the fake company documents and fraudulent wire transfer details. He planned this from the beginning, I told Jordan one night, scrolling through photos of us, evidence of what I thought had been real. He studied me, figured out how to gain my trust, and executed his plan perfectly. The worst part was the shame. I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents or colleagues what had happened. I was a software engineer, someone trained to analyze systems and spot flaws, yet I had failed to see through the most important system failure of my life. 3 months after Ryan vanished, I received an email from Western Union. Someone had attempted to wire money from an account with my credentials, but the transaction had been flagged for verification. I hadn't initiated any transfers. When I called their fraud department, they confirmed someone had my personal information and was attempting to access additional funds in my name. Identity theft, another parting gift for Ryan. I spent weeks freezing credit accounts, changing passwords, and setting up fraud alerts. Each action was a fresh reminder of his betrayal. During one particularly low moment, I found myself parked outside his former apartment building at 3 a.m, wondering if there was any trace of him left to find. My therapist, whom Jordan had practically dragged me to call this rumination, and encouraged me to focus on rebuilding rather than revenge. But the injustice burned like acid in my stomach. Ryan had not only stolen my money, but was actively trying to take more. He was out there somewhere, probably running the same scam on another unsuspecting woman. For months after Ryan's disappearance, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Is this Megan Walsh?" A woman's voice asked. "Who's asking?" I replied cautiously. "My name is Danielle Arias. I believe we've been dating the same man." My heart pounded as Danielle explained that she had met a man calling himself Brian Coleman at a charity event in Los Angeles. They had been dating for 2 months when he began discussing his revolutionary startup and need for bridge funding. Something felt off. Daniela explained. so I hired a private investigator. He found multiple identities, Ryan Cooper being one of them. Your name came up in his research. We met for coffee the next day. Daniela was everything I wasn't: confident, suspicious by nature, and unwilling to invest time without thorough due diligence. I had uncovered that Ryan was actually David Mitchell, a serial romance scammer with at least 4 known aliases and potential victims in 3 states. He's good, Daniela admitted, sliding a folder across the table. Charming, attentive, seems legitimate enough to fool smart women, but he's gotten sloppy. The same fake developer, same wireframes, even some of the same love notes. Here, compare. I read through the material, my hands shaking. The similarities were undeniable. Even the little encouragement notes were nearly identical. There are at least 3 others we know of, Daniela continued. A doctor in Chicago, a financial analyst in Boston, and a marketing executive in Portland. Combined, he's taken over $200,000. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because we're going to find him, she said firmly. And we're going to make him pay. Daniela's pie had tracked David's pattern. He typically laid low for 2 to 3 months after each scam before emerging with a new identity in a new city. Based on financial transactions, the pie believed David was currently somewhere in Southern California. For the first time since David disappeared, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose, determination, rage with direction. Daniela and I established a system. We created a shared database of David's known behaviors, phrases, techniques, and visual identifiers. We set up alerts for specific types of startup events in target cities where he might appear. We even created a private social media group for his victims, eventually connecting with the doctor from Chicagoland, the marketing executive from Portland. Together, we pooled resources to expand the pie's investigation. Each woman brought unique skills to our pursuit. The doctor had medical connections that helped track prescription patterns. The marketing executive had media contacts. Daniela had wealth and determination. I had technical skills. 5 months after David had disappeared with my money, our digital dragnet detected something: a new LinkedIn profile for a Derek Miller, claiming to be the founder of a startup called NextSync with a business model suspiciously similar to Enterlink. The profile photo was clearly David with darker hair and glasses. More significantly, this Derek Miller was listed as a participant in an upcoming reality TV competition called Launchpad, Shark Tank-style show where entrepreneurs competed for investment and mentorship. The show was currently filming its first season in Los Angeles. He's going mainstream, Daniela said when I called her with the news. This is either incredibly stupid or incredibly bold. It's both, I replied, already formulating a plan. And it's going to be his downfall. Getting the producers of Launchpad to take my claims seriously proved challenging. Entertainment companies receive countless claims and complaints about their contestants, most of which they dismiss as attempts at publicity or revenge. Initially, mails went unanswered. Phone calls were redirected to general mailboxes. I needed irrefutable evidence and a compelling narrative that would make them see exposing David as beneficial to their show, not detrimental. The breakthrough came through the marketing executive in our group, Vanessa. She had previously worked with one of the production company's subsidiaries and managed to secure a 15-minute meeting with a junior producer named Alex. They won't care about the morality, Vanessa coached me before the meeting. They care about ratings. Make this about drama, not justice. I arrived at the production office armed with a carefully organized presentation documentation of David's multiple identities, testimonials from his victims, financial records showing his pattern of fraud, and most critically side-by-side comparisons of Derek Miller with Ryan Cooper and his other aliases. Alex, a harried 20-something with a permanent expression of skepticism, gave me exactly 12 minutes before checking his watch. Look, I'm sorry this happened to you, he said, flipping through my materials. But we've already shot most of the season. Derek or David, whatever his name is, has made it to the finals. He's an audience favorite. Charismatic, great backstory. What backstory? I asked, my stomach churning. Orphaned at 16, worked 3 jobs to put himself through college. Developed his software after seeing inefficiencies in hospital systems when his foster mother was ill, Alex recited. It's compelling television. It's completely fabricated, I said flatly. His parents are alive and well in Ohio. He dropped out of community college after 1 semester. And his revolutionary software doesn't exist, it's vaporware he uses to scam investors. Alex's expression shifted slightly. You can prove all this? Every word. And I'm not the only victim. There are at least 4 others, possibly more. He leaned forward, suddenly more engaged. And these other women, They'd be willing to appear on camera? I hadn't expected this turn. What do you mean? Reality TV thrives on conflict and resolution, Alex explained, his professional demeanor giving way to excitement. Imagine the season finale, Derek David on stage, celebrating his journey, when suddenly his past comes walking in. The confrontation, the revelation, the fallout, it would be ratings gold. My initial instinct was revulsion. This wasn't entertainment, it was my life, my trauma. But then I considered the alternative. David continuing his scams, hurting more women, never facing consequences. I need to discuss this with the others, I said carefully. And we'd need guarantees, legal protection, no exploitation of our stories. Of course, Alex nodded eagerly. I'll need to pitch this to the executive producers, but I think they'll bite. This is the kind of authentic drama viewers crave. When I presented the proposition to our group, reactions were mixed. Aniela was immediately on board, seeing it as poetic justice. The doctor, Elizabeth, was concerned about professional repercussions but ultimately agreed it might prevent future victims. Vanessa had media experience and helped us negotiate terms that protected our dignity while ensuring David's exposure. What followed was a whirlwind of legal agreements, planning sessions, and emotional preparation. The executive producers, seeing the potential for a sensational finale, agreed to our conditions, but insisted on maintaining secrecy, even from their own crew. Only 5 people knew what would happen during the final episode. As filming day approached, complications arose. David's lawyer, unaware of our plan, sent cease and desist letters to the production company regarding any defamatory statements about his client. The network's legal department wavered, concerned about liability. Then, 3 days before the finale, our group received anonymous emails warning us to back off or face consequences. The messages contained personal details that only someone tracking us could know. David had apparently discovered our investigation and was attempting to intimidate us. Rather than deterring us, these threats strengthened our resolve and provided additional evidence of David's character. The production company, seeing the potential legal issues as outweighed by the dramatic potential, proceeded with the plan. The day before filming, another obstacle emerged. One of the show's investors had received a tip about irregularities in Derek Miller's background and wanted him removed from the competition immediately, before the finale. If we pull him now, you lose your chance at public vindication, Alex explained during an emergency meeting. We'd handle it quietly behind the scenes. This presented a difficult choice. The investor's intervention could ensure David faced some consequences, but it would happen privately. Our public confrontation would be cancelled and David might find ways to wriggle out of serious repercussions. After consulting with our group, I made a decision that surprised even me. I asked to meet with the investor. Marcus Jensen was a Silicon Valley veteran who had built and sold 3 successful companies. His interest in Launchpad was both financial and personal. He enjoyed mentoring promising entrepreneurs. When I was ushered into his hotel suite, he greeted me with unexpected warmth. "Ms. Welsh, I appreciate your courage in coming forward," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've reviewed the materials you provided to the production company. This man is not just a fraud but a predator. That's why we need to expose him publicly," I explained. A private dismissal would just send him underground. He'd emerge with a new identity, new victims. Jensen nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your position, but consider the platform we're giving him. Even in disgrace, this appearance legitimizes him to some degree. Not if it's done right," I countered. "Not if it's clear that his entire persona is fabricated. The show has footage of all his claims, his pitched product, his supposed background. Revealing the truth dismantles everything he's built." Our discussion continued for over an hour. Jensen raised valid concerns about sensation, alleging fraud and potential legal complications. I emphasized the pattern of behavior that would likely continue without public exposure. Eventually, we reached a compromise. The confrontation would proceed, but Jensen would ensure it focused on the fraudulent business practices rather than the personal relationships. Additionally, he would personally fund resources for victims of investment scams and commit to helping us recover some of our losses through civil proceedings. As I left Jensen's hotel, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Smart move, meeting with Jensen. But you're playing a dangerous game. I know where you live. Last chance to walk away." The threat confirmed my suspicion. David had sources within the production. I forwarded the message to our security contact and doubled down on precautions, moving to a hotel for the night and ensuring the others did the same. The morning of the finale arrived with a mixture of dread and determination. The production team had arranged for us to watch most of the episode from a private green room, entering only for the planned confrontation. Through monitors, we watched as the final 3 contestants, including Derek, presented their businesses to the panel of investor judges. David was magnificent, confident, articulate, passionate about his non-existent product. He fielded technical questions with plausible-sounding jargon and responded to concerns with well-rehearsed assurances. His next sync demonstration, smoke and mirrors with no functional back end, impressed the non-technical judges. When he was announced as the winner, awarded a $250,000 investment package and mentorship opportunities, I felt physically ill. His acceptance speech included thanks to his late foster parents and the hospital staff who had inspired his innovation. Then came our cue. As David basked in applause, the host's expression shifted. "Before we conclude, there's something we need to address," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "Derek, we've received some concerning information about you and your company." The cameras captured his momentary confusion, quickly masked with a practiced smile. "I'm an open book," he said confidently. "What would you like to know?" "Perhaps these individuals can explain," the host replied, gesturing toward the side stage. The four of us walked out together, a united front. The studio audience murmured in confusion. David's face remained composed, though I caught the flash of panic in his eyes when he recognized me. "Derek Miller, or should I say David Mitchell, or Ryan Cooper, or Brian Coleman," the host began, reading from her prompter. "These women claim you've defrauded them of hundreds of thousands of dollars through romance scams and fake business ventures." What followed was 15 minutes of carefully orchestrated revelation. The production team displayed side-by-side comparisons of David's various identities. They showed excerpts from his contradictory backstories across different episodes. They presented documentation of his fraud, including my investment agreement with its fabricated company details. Throughout, David attempted to maintain composure, offering explanations that grew increasingly desperate. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted, sweat now visible on his forehead. "Yes, I've used different names for different markets, that's just branding. And yes, perhaps I'd dramatized elements of my background for impact, but Next Sync is real. The investment was real. Then perhaps you can explain why the demonstration we just saw was running on a loop of pre-recorded screens." Jensen interjected from the judges' panel. "Our technical team examined your presentation device during the break. There is no functional software, just a series of mock-bits designed to give the appearance of a working product." The audience gasped. David's face drained of color. "Or maybe you could explain why your supposed development team in India doesn't exist?" I added, finding my voice stronger than expected. "The office address you provided is a vacant lot. The team photos on your website are stock images." With each revelation, David's rebuttals grew weaker. When confronted with evidence that he had attempted to withdraw from my accounts after disappearing, he claimed it was an administrative error. When presented with the identical love notes he had given to multiple women, he suggested coincidence. "These women are clearly coordinating their stories," he finally blurted, desperation evident. "This is character assassination. They're jealous of my success." That's when the host delivered the final blow. "We've taken the liberty of contacting your parents in Ohio," she said calmly. "The parents you claimed were deceased. They had quite a lot to say about your history of deception, dating back to high school." The screen behind her showed a video interview with an older couple who bore a striking resemblance to David. His mother tearfully recounted his pattern of license schemes, his father expressing shame at his son's actions. David looked as though he might collapse. This is an ambush," he stammered. "I need my lawyer. I refuse to continue without representation." Security approached from both sides of the stage as David began backing away, looking for exits. The audience, initially confused, had turned hostile, with murmurs and boos growing louder. "You've stolen more than money," I said, stepping forward as he retreated. "You've stolen rust, security, and peace of mind. And for what? So you could pretend to be successful instead of actually building something real?" David lunged toward me suddenly, his composure completely shattered. "You think you're so clever," he hissed, quiet enough that only I could hear. "This isn't over." Security intercepted him immediately, restraining him as producers called for an unplanned commercial break. As they escorted him off stage, the audience erupted in a mixture of applause for us and jeers for him. In the chaos that followed, I stood motionless, processing what had just transpired. After months of helplessness and shame, I had faced my deceiver before an audience of millions. The vindication was overwhelming, but hollow. My savings were still gone, my trust still damaged. What I didn't know then was that this public exposure was just the beginning of David's reckoning and my recovery. The aftermath of the launch pad finale was immediate and far-reaching. The episode, hastily edited to highlight the confrontation, aired 3 weeks later and became the most watched reality TV finale of the season. Fraud patent scammer shut down, rendered nationwide. Entertainment news sites ran headlines like reality show turns real fraud, exposed live on launch pad man's house of cards collapses on national TV. I received hundreds of messages, some from other potential victims who recognized David from their own lives, others from people who had experienced similar scams, and many offering support and admiration for our public stand. More significantly, the exposure triggered serious legal consequences. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, which had previously deprioritized our individual complaints, now had irrefutable evidence of a multi-state fraud operation. They launched a formal investigation, freezing accounts associated with David's various identities and aliases. 2 weeks after the episode aired, I received a call from Special Agent Teresa Mendoza. Ms. Walsh, we've located approximately $45,000 in accounts connected to David Mitchell, she explained. Based on transaction records, we believe this includes a portion of your investment. Once the case concludes, you should be able to recover some of your losses. The news brought tears to my eyes, not because the money would solve my financial problems, but because it represented accountability. David wouldn't completely escape the consequences of his actions. 3 days later, David's lawyer contacted me with a settlement offer $30,000 in exchange for dropping any civil claims and signing an non-disclosure agreement about our relationship. He's worried about additional publicity, the lawyer explained coolly. This offer expires in 48 hours. I consulted with the lawyer Marcus Jensen had provided to our group. He's trying to buy your silence cheaply, she advised. The civil case could potentially recover much more, especially with the evidence now public. Plus, an NDA would prevent you from warning others about him in the future. I rejected the offer. 2 days later, it increased to $40,000. I rejected that too. Meanwhile, my support network expanded beyond our original victim group. A financial advisor offered pro bono services to help me rebuild my savings. A cybercustody specialist volunteered to strengthen my digital privacy. A literary agent approached about potentially turning my experience into a cautionary memoir. Most surprisingly, Launchpad investor Marcus Jensen kept his promise to help. He created a specialized fund for victims of investment fraud and hired me as a consultant to develop software that could help detect and prevent romance scams. Your technical background combined with your unfortunately unique experience makes you the perfect person for this, he explained during our first official meeting. Transform your pain into purpose. 6 weeks after the finale aired, authorities located underarrested David at a bus station in San Diego, attempting to cross into Mexico with fake identification. His new appearance, dyed black hair, beard, colored contacts hadn't fooled facial recognition systems alerted to watch for him. The day after his arrest, I received an unexpected call from the detention center where he was being held. Megan. David's voice was uncharacteristically subdued. I need to explain myself. There's nothing to explain, I replied, my heart racing despite my calm tone. Your actions speak for themselves. You don't understand the pressure I was under, he continued, desperation evident. I gotten over my head with some dangerous people. The money I took from you, most of it went to pay them off. It was the same David spinning stories, creating fictional scenarios, attempting to manipulate my emotions. But I was different now. Save your stories for your trial, I said evenly. I'm not interested in your excuses. Please, Megan. His voice cracked. I really did care for you. That wasn't fake. We had something special. I almost laughed. You said the exact same thing to at least 3 other women? Word for word. Did you think we wouldn't compare notes? I'm facing serious time, he continued, ignoring my comment. Federal charges, multiple states. But if you would tell them I was trying to build a real business, that I intended to repay you and even trying yourself out as a Bruce actor. Goodbye, David, I interrupted. Don't contact me again. As I hung up, I realized something profound. His words no longer had power over me. The charm that once seemed so genuine now sounded hollow, the manipulation transparent. In exposing him, I had freed myself. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. The prosecutors building a case that now included charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate commerce violations asked if I would testify. It won't be like television, the assistant district attorney warned. His defense will try to discredit you, suggest you invested with full knowledge of the risks. Perhaps even that you had a personal vendetta when the relationship ended. I understand, I replied. But I'll testify, not just for myself, but for anyone else he might have targeted in the future. 2 days before the hearing, David's lawyer approached with a new offer. David would plead guilty to reduce charges if I and the other victims would support a lenient sentencing recommendation. This time I consulted not just with our lawyer but with Daniela, Elizabeth, and Vanessa. We were united in our response, no deal. David would face the full weight of his actions. The night before the hearing, I visited my parents for the first time since the Launchpad episode aired. I had avoided telling them about my financial loss and humiliation, but the public exposure had forced a difficult conversation. "I'm so proud of you, Aunt, so proud of you," my mother said, holding my hands across the kitchen table. "Not for going on television though, that took courage, but for standing up for yourself and others. I just wish I'd been smarter from the beginning." I admitted, $70,000, Mom. My entire savings. "Intelligence isn't immunity to deception," my father said quietly. "Some of the smartest people in the world fall for scams because they're also human. They trust, they hope, they love." Their understanding and lack of judgment broke something inside me, a final barrier of shame I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I cried in their arms like a child, mourning not just the money but the innocent trust I'd lost. The next morning, as I prepared to leave for the courthouse, I received a text from a production assistant at Launchpad. "Thought you should know ratings for the finale broke records. Season 2 will include a full episode on identifying investment scams. You changed the conversation." As I drove to the courthouse, I reflected on the twisted journey of the past year. I had lost savings, trust, and a piece of my heart to a skilled manipulator. But I had gained something to resilience, wisdom, and a community of supportive people who valued truth over charisma. David's preliminary hearing would be just the beginning of a long legal process. Some of my money might never be recovered. The emotional scars would take time to heal completely. But as I parked at the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before I met Ryan Cooper. Peace. I walked into the building with my head high, no longer a victim but a woman reclaiming her power, one step at a time. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, nothing like the dramatic spacious chambers depicted in television shows. Polished wooden benches, fluorescent lighting that cast an unflattering pallor, and the subtle scent of lemon disinfectant created an atmosphere of sterile formality. I sat in the front row beside Daniela, Elizabeth, and Vanessa, our informal sisterhood of survivors, as we'd come to call ourselves. When they brought David in, I was struck by how ordinary he looked in his orange jumpsuit. Without his carefully cultivated wardrobe and charismatic affect, he appeared smaller, somehow diminished. His eyes scanned the courtroom, widening slightly when he spotted us sitting together. For a brief moment, our gazes locked, and I saw something I'd never witnessed from him before a sector. There, the preliminary hearing proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Charges were read, procedural matters discussed, evidence cataloged. The prosecution outlined a case that spanned 5 states and potentially dozens of victims beyond our group. They had traced bank accounts, identified aliases, and mapped a pattern of fraudulent activity dating back nearly 7 years. What surprised me most was the revelation that Ryan Cooper was not David's first foray into romance scams. It was merely his most successful iteration after years of refining his techniques. Before targeting professional women with investment schemes, he had run smaller cons, insurance fraud against elderly widows, credit card scams targeting recent divorces, even a brief period impersonating a wounded veteran to solicit donations. The defendant has demonstrated a consistent pattern of predatory behavior. The prosecutor explained, evolving his methods to exploit victims' trust with increasing sophistication. David's public defender looked overwhelmed by the volume of evidence, requesting continuances and additional time to review materials. Throughout the proceedings, David maintained a posture of injured innocence, occasionally shaking his head at particularly damning revelations or attempting to make sympathetic eye contact with the judge. When the hearing concluded with a decision to proceed to trial, David was led past our row. He paused briefly despite the corrections officer's hand on his arm. "Megan untied her voice after," he whispered, his voice carrying just far enough for me to hear. "This isn't who I really am. You know that, right?" Before I could respond, Daniela stood, creating a physical barrier between us. "Keep walking, David," she said firmly. "You've said quite enough." The officer tugged him forward, and David disappeared through the side door, looking back once with an expression I couldn't quite decipher: regret, anger, or perhaps simple calculation. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, alerted to the connection between our case and the viral Launchpad confrontation. We had prepared for this, developing a concise statement with our lawyer's guidance. Elizabeth, the most comfortable with public speaking, served as our spokesperson. "We are satisfied that the justice system is taking these crimes seriously. This case is about more than romance or investment fraud. It's about holding accountable those who systematically exploit trust for personal gain. We ask for privacy as this process continues, and we encourage anyone who believes they may have been victimized by David Mitchell or his aliases to contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit." As cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, Marcus Jensen appeared at the periphery of the crowd, waiting patiently. When we extracted ourselves from the media's crumb, he approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I wanted to let you know that the foundation is ready to launch. We've secured initial funding and developed preliminary screening protocols." The foundation, officially named Trust Again Advocacy for Fraud Survivors, had evolved from Jensen's initial promise into a substantial nonprofit initiative. Beyond financial assistance for victims, it would provide legal resources, therapeutic support, and education about sophisticated scams. "We'd like all of you to be involved in whatever capacity you're comfortable with," Jensen continued. "Your experiences provide invaluable insight. We agreed to meet the following week to discuss details." As we parted ways, Jensen handed me a separate envelope. "The software development position we discussed," he explained. "The formal offer if you're still interested." I had been consulting part-time on the anti-fraud detection program while maintaining my regular engineering job. The offer represented a chance to fully commit to transforming my experience into something constructive, creating algorithms that might identify patterns in financial transactions and communications indicative of romance scams. That evening, alone in my apartment, I opened the envelope. The compensation package was generous, not enough to immediately replace my lost savings, but substantial. More meaningful was the detailed project description, which incorporated many of my suggestions for using artificial intelligence to detect linguistic patterns common in scammer communications. As I reviewed the documents, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this is just beginning. Smart money always finds a way out. See you soon." My hands trembled as I contacted Agent Mendoza, forwarding the message. Within an hour, she confirmed it had come from a contraband phone in the detention center. David's bail had been denied due to flight risk, but he had apparently managed to access communication anyway, or addressing the security breach, she assured me, and adding witness intimidation to the charges. "Don't worry, he's not going anywhere." But worry I did. Despite rational assurances, I found myself checking my locks twice, installing a security system, and scanning parking lots before exiting my car. The message had achieved its intended effect, disrupting my sense of safety just as I was beginning to rebuild it. 2 weeks later, as David's case moved through pre-trial motions, I received a call from a name I didn't recognize. "Lisa Mitchell." "Megan? This is David's sister," she said, her voice tentative. "I know this is unexpected, but I was hoping we could meet." My immediate instinct was refusal, but something in her tone gave me pause. "Why would you want to meet me?" "Because I need to apologize," she replied simply. "Not for him, he's responsible for his own actions. But my family, we enabled him for years. We made excuses, covered for him, bailed him out. We're part of why he became what he is." Curiosity overcame caution, and I agreed to meet Lisa at a public cafe near my office. She was unmistakably David's relative, the same blue eyes and angular features, though her expression carried a weariness his never did. "Our parents are devastated," she explained after we'd settled with our coffees. That interview they gave to the TV show was the first time they've ever publicly acknowledged what David really is. For years, they convinced themselves his schemes were just creative business ventures or misunderstandings. Lisa shared stories of David's childhood manipulations, stealing from neighbors, then crying innocently when confronted, charming teachers into excusing missing assignments, convincing relatives to fund non-existent school trips. What might have been dismissed as typical childhood mischief had evolved into something more sinister without proper intervention. By the time we recognized the pattern, it was too late, Lisa said, rubbing her temple. He had perfected the ability to make people doubt their own perceptions. Even when presented with evidence, he could talk his way out of consequences. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I want you to know it wasn't your fault," she said earnestly. "David has fooled people who've known him his entire life. And because I want to help make this right, however I can." Lisa provided access to family financial records showing David's previous schemes, names of childhood friends he had defrauded, and details about assets he might have hidden. This information, passed to the prosecution, strengthened the case considerably. More significantly, Lisa agreed to testify about David's pattern of behavior, a devastating blow to his defense strategy of portraying himself as a well-intentioned entrepreneur whose business simply failed. As the trial date approached, David's lawyer made increasingly desperate settlement offers. The final proposal, delivered 2 days before jury selection, included full restitution to identified victims in exchange for a guilty plea to lesser charges carrying a maximum of 3 years imprisonment. The prosecutors presented this offer to our group, explaining the advantages. guaranteed repayment, avoiding the stress of testimony and cross-examination, and certainty of some punishment. The alternative is proceeding to trial. The assistant district attorney explained. While our case is strong, juries can be unpredictable, and trials are emotionally exhausting for victims. We discussed the options privately, weighing practical considerations against principles. Daniela and Elizabeth favored accepting the deal, prioritizing financial recovery and closure. Vanessa and I remained opposed, believing the punishment inadequate for the harm caused. 3 years means he'd likely serve 18 months with good behavior, I argued, and he'd be free to start over again with new victims. But with the felony record and the publicity from the show, Elizabeth countered, his ability to scam would be significantly impaired. People have short memories, Vanessa responded, and he's exceptional at reinvention. Our debate continued through the evening without resolution. Finally, I suggested a compromise. We would accept the plea deal with additional conditions: mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, extended supervised release with financial monitoring, and registration in a database of financial offenders if such a system could be established. The prosecutors took our conditions back to David's defense team, who initially balked at the additional restrictions, as the deadline for jury selection loomed. However, they reluctantly agreed to the modified terms. The day of the plea hearing arrived with unexpected emotions. I had anticipated satisfaction, perhaps even triumph at seeing David legally acknowledge his crimes. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and lingering anger as I watched him enter the courtroom in handcuffs. When asked by the judge if he understood the charges, David responded with uncharacteristic humility. "Yes, Your Honor," as he formally entered his guilty plea to multiple counts of wire fraud and identity theft. I studied his face for signs of the charismatic man who had once promised me a future. The performance was flawless: contrition, remorse, appropriate solemnity, but his eyes remained calculating, assessing the room as if searching for sympathetic faces. The judge reviewed the plea agreement carefully, questioning the prosecution about the relatively lenient sentencing recommendation. Given the extensive nature of these crimes and the apparent lack of remorse until caught, why should I accept this agreement? The prosecutor explained the practical benefits: guaranteed restitution, sparing victims the trauma of trial, and the comprehensive post-release monitoring we had insisted upon. After considerable deliberation, the judge reluctantly approved the agreement. Before finalizing the sentence, the judge offered victims the opportunity to make impact statements. Each of us had prepared remarks, understanding this might be our only chance to address David directly in a formal setting. Daniela spoke of the financial hardship and trust issues that continued to affect her daily life. Elizabeth described the professional embarrassment and credibility damage she had suffered. Vanessa detailed the anxiety and security concerns that persisted months after discovery. When my turn came, I approached the podium with steady steps, my prepared statement in hand. But looking at David directly, seeing him maintain his mask of remorse while his eyes remained empty of genuine emotion, I set aside my written remarks. "David," I began, "I've spent months trying to understand why someone with your intelligence and charm would choose to cause such deliberate harm. You could have built something real: legitimate business, authentic relationships, a life based on actual achievement rather than illusion." His expression remained carefully neutral as I continued. "What I've realized is that understanding your motivations doesn't matter. What matters are your choices and their consequences. You chose repeatedly and methodically to exploit people's trust for your own gain. You stole more than money, you stole time, and you stole time, emotional energy, and peace of mind." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I'm not here to express anger, though I've felt plenty. I'm here to tell you that despite your best efforts, you failed in the most important sense. You didn't break me. You didn't destroy my capacity for trust or hope. In fact, your actions ultimately connected me with extraordinary people I might never have met otherwise, people committed to preventing others from experiencing what we did." David shifted slightly in his seat, the first crack in his composed facade. "The foundation we're building, the software we're developing, the awareness we're creating, those will be your true legacy. Not the temporary wealth you accumulated or the fictional persona you created, but the protective systems established specifically because of the harm you caused." I looked directly into his eyes for the final words. "So in an ironic way, I thank you, David. Your deception has ultimately led to something authentic and valuable. I hope someday you find the courage to build something real too." As I returned to my seat, David's careful mask slipped momentarily. For a fleeting second, I glimpsed something that might have been shame, or perhaps simply frustration at being so thoroughly exposed. The judge sentenced David to 36 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release with strict financial monitoring. He was ordered to make full restitution to identified victims and prohibited from entrepreneurial activities without court approval during his supervision period. As David was led from the courtroom, he turned slightly, attempting to catch my eye one final time. I deliberately looked away, denying him even that small connection. Outside, beneath a sky-threatening rain, our group embraced in a circle of shared understanding. No words were necessary. We had walked through fire together, undemerged, changed but intact. 6 months later, I stood before an audience of financial crimes investigators, consumer protection advocates, and technology specialists at the inaugural conference of the Trust Again Foundation. On screen behind me was the beta version of Trust Verify, the software I had helped develop using behavioral patterns identified from David's communications and transaction history. Roman scammers succeed because they study human psychology and exploit fundamental desires for connection, for partnership, for purpose, I explained to the attentive audience. This software analyzes linguistic patterns, transaction timing, and behavioral inconsistencies that might indicate manipulation. As I demonstrated the system's capabilities, I noticed Marcus Jensen in the back row, nodding approvingly. Beside him sat Lisa Mitchell, who had become an unexpected ally in our prevention efforts, offering insights into the development of predatory behavior. During the following QA session, a young cybercustody specialist raised her hand. The technical solution is impressive, she acknowledged, but how do you address the human element? People want to believe in leavened opportunity, sometimes against all evidence. I considered the question carefully before responding. Technology can identify red flags, but you're right, human hope is powerful. That's why our approach combines technical screening with education and emotional support. We teach people to recognize their own vulnerability without shaming them for it. After the presentation, I checked my phone to find an email notification from the Bureau of Prisons. David had been transferred to a minimum security facility where he would participate in a financial ethics program, one specifically designed for white-collar offenders with antisocial tendencies. Attached to the notification was a letter David had written as part of his rehabilitation program. Participation was voluntary on my part. I could read it or delete it without response. For several minutes, I stared at the attachment icon, weighing the potential impact on my well-being. Curiosity eventually won out. The letter was surprisingly brief. Megan, I've had 6 months to reflect on the harm I've caused. Prison provides ample time for introspection. While I doubt you'll believe me, I want you to know that of all my relationships, what we shared contained elements of truth. Your insight at the sentencing about my wasting potential on illusion rather than building something real has stayed with me. The psychologist who suggests my behavior stems from an inability to tolerate authentic vulnerability. Perhaps she's right. Building facades became easier than risking genuine connection and possible rejection. I don't expect forgiveness or response. I simply wanted to acknowledge that your words reached me in a way nothing else has. David. I closed the email without responding, neither accepting nor rejecting his tentative step toward accountability. Perhaps someday I would engage with his attempted amends, but not yet. My focus remained on building rather than relitigating the past. That evening, I had dinner with Daniela, who had become a close friend beyond our shared experience. She was dating again cautiously, with the benefit of both wisdom and our software's verification process. I ran his profile through Trust Verify, she admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Everything checked out. Is that terrible? Starting a relationship with digital background checks? It's prudent, I replied. Trust should be informed, not blind. Has he figured out you investigated him? Actually, I told him. She laughed. He was impressed rather than offended. Said it showed good judgment given what I've been through. A good sign, I agreed. Later that night, standing on my balcony overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. The $70,000 now mostly recovered through restitution and civil proceedings had purchased something no legitimate investment could have profound insight into human nature, including my own. I had learned that intelligence doesn't prevent vulnerability, that shame only serves those who exploit it, and that genuine strength often emerges from moments of greatest weakness. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, old anxiety flared. Was it David somehow circumventing prison communications restrictions? But the message proved benign, a colleague from the foundation sharing a news article about romance scam prevention. I realized then that while vigilance remained necessary, fear no longer controlled my responses. The hypervigilance that had characterized the months after David's disappearance had gradually transformed into something more balanced: awareness without paranoia, caution without paralysis. As I prepared for bed, I noticed the framed photo that now occupied my bedside table, not a romantic image but a picture of our four-woman team at the Foundation's opening, arm's length, faces resolved and hopeful. Beside it, a business card Marcus Jensen had given me, with his handwritten note: from deception, truth. From loss, creation. Your resilience is your greatest asset. In the morning, I would return to the Foundation offices to continue refining our detection algorithms. There would be meetings with financial institutions interested in implementing our verification protocols, sessions with support groups for fraud survivors, and ongoing collaboration with law enforcement. The work was meaningful, challenging, and authentic, everything the false promises of David's fictional startup had not been. In transmuting my experience into protection for others, I had found purpose beyond recovery. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that David's final text before his arrest, "You think you've won, but this is just beginning," had proven unexpectedly prophetic, though not in the way he intended. This was indeed just the beginning, not of his revenge but of my reconstruction. The $70,000 investment that I had once considered my greatest financial mistake had yielded returns I could never have anticipated: a powerful network of allies, a meaningful new career path, and most importantly, an unshakable understanding of my own resilience. Some lessons come at extraordinary cost. The wisdom is in using them to build something that makes the price worth paying.